Everyone, thank you all for attending our panel. This is the third panel. Today is our panel is about sustainability, access, and advocacy, current MENA digital humanities initiatives. We will have 3 presentations. Each presentation will take 20 minutes, and we will leave 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. I will introduce our presentation and presenters in the order of the way they're going to deliver their presentation. Our first presenter is Correa. Del is Middle East Studies Librarian and History Coordinator, the University of Texas at Houston. Del will be talking about making Arabic OCR sustainable in the university library environment. Our second speaker is David Wrisley. David is a professor of digital humanities, New York University, Abu Dhabi, and will join him Almazhan, Kapan, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, interns at the OpenGulf Research Group at United Arab Emirates. Both of them will be talking about bridging the digital divide, working with transliterated proper names in cultural collections. Our third presentation will be by Ozan Ceyhan. Ozan is a senior Ottoman specialist at Miletos R&D Incorporation in Turkey. Ozan will be talking about recognizing Ottoman's Turkish print with Müteferriqa, a first step in digital humanities. We will start with Del. Del, the floor is for you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen with you all. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining us for this panel. I'm very excited to be here. We just came out of a wonderful roundtable on digital scholarship as well. So we're really in the digital scholarship vibe right now, which is great. And so as Magda said, I'll be presenting a paper, hopefully a paper, yeah, someday, called Making Arabic OCR Sustainable in the University Library Environment. And I've tried to keep this pretty straightforward. I think I include this disclaimer later as well, but I just want to say I'm a librarian. I'm not a developer. I'm not in the IT department for my library. So I'm not coming at this as, you know, an OCR developer, an OCR specialist. But I am coming at it as someone who is developing expertise with using OCR in a library environment and helping users employ OCR for their research. So my thanks also to Anais, Selma, and Magda for organizing this conference. I'm very excited about this. I think it's great that we have all this coordinated as one panel. So let's get started. So it is commonly known in Middle East library and scholarly circles that OCR for Arabic is at best a rather complex computer science undertaking and at worst woefully inaccurate. The state of Arabic OCR stems in part, if not entirely, from the rather Anglo-centric nature of computing at large, which also results in the remarkably high financial and time cost of related endeavors in Arabic OCR. In the context of the North American Research University and its libraries, where funding for collections and academic programs from and about the Middle East is far from universally robust, Arabic OCR is a dream largely made possible by generous external funding. However, the realization of this dream has proven itself temporary. For example, external funding runs out with no local plan for sustainability, largely inaccessible. For example, the results of supposedly open source projects prove murky to decipher or reuse, or disappointingly incomplete, such as when the software works well for certain formats like crisply clean contemporary printed monographs, but not for slightly less perfect printings. So today I'd like to describe the process of developing and enacting a sustainable internal workflow for the digitization and OCR of an Arabic serial, جريدة البلاغ الأسبوعي. at a North American university research library using an existing subscription to the software DocWorks and limited funding from our Center for Middle Eastern Studies for student labor. In particular, I'll discuss how such a complex undertaking could be broken up into manageable pieces that fit into existing and normal staff time expectations. I'll also examine how spending library staff time on something seemingly esoteric in this particular context and specific, like Arabic OCR, has benefited projects in other areas, like American Studies, as well as staff workflows across the organization. In short, this presentation seeks to demonstrate that Arabic OCR should not be limited to multi-million-dollar limited-term grant projects. Rather, it is feasible to integrate into the fraught university research library context, and moreover, is a rewarding undertaking with benefits well beyond the scholarly applications of OCR. So I hope by the end of this, you all will feel empowered to pursue OCR projects yourselves at your libraries. Okay, so I think I should give you some context. All right, so without getting lost in too many of the details, here is some of the context at UT in which this project developed. So around the time that I was thinking about this project, there was an administration-led push to create a digital asset management system, which I will henceforth call the DAMS, and a digital collections portal, which is what you see now on the screen. And we needed material to fill these. So the DAMS came with built-in Tesseract, which is an open source OCR software. And OCR was regularly being implemented on English language materials from the areas of architecture, American Studies, and UT dissertations and theses. All of that gets stored in the DAMS. This thing it's huge, okay? Because we're talking about a very large university as well, over 50,000 students, plus many more staff and faculty. So we cannot currently serve up any of this OCR data for English or for any other language alongside the digital collections in this digital collections portal that you see here. But it does remain in the DAM, so we are storing it. And so we're keeping it around for when we can actually bring it out. And so I identified the opportunity to bring Arabic to the attention of the DAMS managers and libraries administration early on in the development of these local digital collections, so that it could be included in any developments for OCR within the DAMS going forward. It seemed like a ship that I should jump on at that particular moment and hold on for dear life and keep on with it. I'm also just incredibly lucky that I have colleagues who found this idea of Arabic OCR in the library environment at UT as intriguing as I did. So I'm glad that they were willing to explore it with me. So at the same time that we were developing out these digital collections, we also had some staffing concerns. Our IT department has become much more robust than it was. So we actually do have a series of developer teams, which is fantastic. But several key staff members in digitization and content management have left UT during the course of this project. And this project has only been around since fall 2019. So this is not unusual for libraries, of course, and of course it was the pandemic as well. And I was aware that we would need a process that could handle frequent turnover, at the very least, because I knew that student workers would be involved, and student workers always have a high turnover rate just for the nature of being students. And so I was interested to make this a process that, one, wouldn't require extra effort by my colleagues. I didn't want to overtax them by bringing this in and then make everybody hate Arabic OCR. And then two, that it would be something that I could temporarily shoulder alone at certain points. That was absolutely essential, that I could not let this falter. It had to be something that I could sustain, even at very limited capacity, but still something that I could sustain. So another part of the context was my own interest in how to make OCR accessible for graduate students and faculty and reliable for non-Roman script languages, in part as a response to identified need. I had been working with a few different graduate students, one in particular from the history department, who was experimenting with various OCR software for a Persian newspaper database, essentially, that he was creating as part of his dissertation. And so that had really inspired me to start thinking about how could this work better for our researchers at UT. And so one of the things we ended up doing around that time as well, just shortly before this project got off the ground, was a colleague of mine and we offered this digital humanities workshop on non-Roman OCR, non-Roman script language OCR. And it was intended to be very broad. And we ended up getting a really great attendance at that workshop. It was in person at the time, in a room capacity of about 30 people, and it was completely full. We even had Latin Americanists who are dealing with primarily Roman script languages coming. So obviously there was a need and there was an interest. People on campus really were invested in this and wanted to know more. And so that was heartening to see that. And it just inspired me as well to continue planning this project and think about, like, you know, what can we really do at UT that's going to be feasible. Also in this context was an increase in faculty and graduate student interest in the early 20th century Middle East, with an emphasis on publications from the elite, educated, politically involved sectors of society. And so this particular periodical is not the only one that I acquired, but I'll get into more about how and why I acquired this one, but I now have a suite of items in this area. And the last and probably perhaps the most apparent context for this project is the pandemic. The pandemic started just as we were getting digitization of this journal off the ground. And so it became apparent very quickly that there is a real need among scholars around the world for digitized Middle Eastern material. And that was exacerbated by the closing of physical collections due to the lockdown. And it also became clear that a good portion of the labor required for digitizing and then OCRing this particular periodical could reasonably be done remotely. So obviously not the digitization itself, but thankfully the pilot digitization had been completed before the pandemic started, so we could start moving on to other processes. We did eventually do some more digitization, but looking at those other processes, so looking at the quality control, the zoning or mapping of the periodical and DocWorks, as well as the OCR correction, all of that could be done in an entirely remote environment. In fact, any student workers who were doing the zoning and the OCR correction, they were having to use remote desktop anyway to access one of the computers in the basement of the library where this was kept. They hadn't been really working at that computer station for a while, even before the pandemic. So that was convenient and nice that this was the kind of work that we could continue doing during the pandemic. And it actually facilitated my ability to hire students who normally may not have been able to take this kind of position due to geographic restrictions. So I was able to hire students, UT Austin students who were not in Austin. So some who may have been doing research or had to live with family elsewhere, et cetera. And so this project offered a training and learning opportunity for these students as well, those who were interested in Middle Eastern studies. Some were interested in the digital scholarship aspect of it and the digitization aspect of it. And so that educational aspect became a bigger selling point during the various student recruitment attempts that I had. So what is the project? The project itself was initially conceived with digitization considerations in mind. And I think that has been a really important aspect of what modest success we've had with this. And I say not just with OCR, not with just getting legible Arabic text out of these images, but having the whole thing work to go from acquiring the journal to having the images in the digital collections portal to being able to save this OCR data to apply in the future in some other manifestation of the dams that we're going to have. And so I knew that when I bought this, that I was going to be digitizing it. And I had given a heads up to folks at the library. So things were lined up and ready to go. And so I think that was really essential to establishing the timing of the work to be done. So as I mentioned before, I had identified this need for early 20th century Arabic language periodicals. I acquired a bunch of them from Egypt and Iraq. And then I also identified a need for local digitized Middle East material. As I said, I tried to jump on this dams boat early. There was a lot of material from architecture, from the Benson Latin American collection at UT, from various other English language periodicals that are out of copyright and safe to put up in the collections portal. But there wasn't terribly much outside of English. And so my global studies colleagues and I were thinking, what can we put in here that will be useful? So that was part of the thinking as well. Then we set some goals. And I say we now because at this point, it's not just me, it's me and at least 15 other people who have been involved in this project at some point or another. So there's lots of people coming in and out of thinking about this. And so in the spring of 2020, that's when the materials arrive. They get whisked through content management in days rather than weeks or months, again, because I had prepped everybody and I had my content management folks on board and we were able to work this into the processes that they have. And we started with a pilot set of 4 issues that we put through the entire OCR process in DocWorks. So that was using a student who was doing a capstone at the time. And so that was free and paid labor, unfortunately, but perhaps remunerated in the sense that it was a class for her. So my mentorship time was used for that, but it was an unpaid internship. And for that, she did mapping and zoning for us and some OCR correction. Then over the next academic year, from 2020 to 2021, we had the goal of completing zoning of all the digitized issues that we had made. And there was no student support for Arabic in this particular phase of it. So I had students with no Arabic capabilities actually working on this, and it worked out better than one might think, because it was mostly just the zoning that they were focusing on. We're not relying on anyone's Arabic abilities to read the text at this point. It's about the shapes, essentially, and identifying where something ends and where something else begins. But throughout that year, I had been thinking, I am going to need Arabic support at some point. So I proposed a summer graduate research assistant position to the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and they were able to award me funding for that. So then in summer 2021, the goal was to create a corrected set of OCR data that could be used to train Tesseract and DocWorks. And I had prepped DocWorks and my digitization colleagues by saying, this is something I'd like to do. I'd like to produce this thing and let's see what we can make use of it, this corrected OCR data. And what that has now come to in fall 2021 is that my colleagues in digitization and I are working with DocWorks to integrate the corrected OCR data into a training model for their Tesseract instance. And so that's where we're currently at. They're integrating that data. And so lessons learned from all of this. Let me give you something else to look at while I'm talking about this, because I'll tell you a little bit more about what this all is. So lessons learned, there were some qualities that I mentioned in my introduction, but I did not want this project to have, and that's for it to be temporary and only functional when funded externally. And so the things that I sought to do to integrate this project into our normal everyday activities at the library is what's making it sustainable. It's something that multiple people now have on their radar, that they care about. It's in their processes and their workflows every day. In this way, I'm thinking about playing the long game, essentially. Obviously, the OCR data has not been integrated into the collections portal yet, so this is not something that I can even really offer to researchers, but I'm planning for that. And I think all of this work will be worth it in the end when we can actually introduce that OCR data to the collections portal. I also didn't want this to be largely inaccessible. I wanted folks to be able to see what we were doing. And so to that end, this presentation is part of that. But also we are going to be putting up the OCR data and our internal documentation into Texas ScholarWorks, which is our institutional repository, and that will be completely open for everyone to see, how we did what we did on the technical side of things. And then I didn't want it to be incomplete. I wanted to have realizable goals. So a concrete set of issues that we're going to start as a pilot for digitization. A concrete goal of X many issues corrected for OCR to then hand over to DocWorks for training Tesseract. So with each step, trying to keep things manageable, pieces that you can bite off and actually chew. You're not going to choke on them in the proverbial sense, I should say. So with all of this in mind, then the workflow that we developed is largely what was already in existence in the digitization department. So the students that I was working with and we embraced their existing workflow and integrated the needs of Arabic OCR into it. So, we had to write a proposal, receive approval for that proposal for the digitization, then determine the timeline. This project, among others, has actually helped define what's needed for the proposal process at UT Austin and who's involved in that approval. So, we've been kind of clearing out the cobwebs and making things more obvious and accessible for staff to be able to propose these kinds of projects. And it's also allowed digitization to develop more experience with non-Roman materials. So this is less of an unknown or an unfamiliar now. Working with Arabic in this way is almost as regular or normal as working with architecture or American studies publications that are in the collections portal. We're also able to help digitization answer questions such as when and where is Arabic expertise needed in this workflow? So it's feasible to digitize without Arabic expertise at hand, but when we can get it, it's great. When it came time for the zoning and mapping, which is what you see on the screen now, this is a screenshot from DocWorks, that task was shared amongst a whole bunch of people, most of whom did not have Arabic. And so, as I said, this was more about looking at the shapes of things. So identifying, this is the title block. Here is an image. Here is the page number. These are paragraphs. What are the numbers of the paragraphs? Is something an advertisement, things like that. And so it didn't necessarily require Arabic expertise. And in fact, this journal is almost trilingual because there's much content in English and French as well. And so the one development that we did offer for the workflow was how we handled the corrections for the OCR. So DocWorks handles all of the OCR editing in the window in the metadata fields that are there in DocWorks. Let me go back up and show you. Yeah, so do you see these windows over here on the left? These are the issues, and then if you open those up, those will show you the metadata with the OCR text under each one. And so that's where you're supposed to be doing the editing, and where we had initially started with it, but then we thought, wait, now we don't know what changes we made because there's no way to track that in DocWorks. So we started pulling it out from DocWorks and putting it into Google Docs. A lot of docs going on here, sorry. We put it into Google Docs so that we could use the suggestion feature or track changes. And then that allowed me to collaborate with her with my GRA this past summer. And then for me to do some kind of peer review basically on her work. And so now we have a record of what were the problems with the OCR. Now we can see that, all right? So just wanted to point out some more of these issues real quick, and then I'll wrap up some of the issues that we came across. Some of the issues in the OCR were not due to Tesseract. They were due to original capture and the quality of the printing. So here you see really great example of bleed through of the ink. This can confuse the OCR software and make it very difficult for it to read, especially this very bottom line. Like you see el-Haditha right there, you can see other text has bled through almost entirely. We also had issues with faded imagery, faded text, and really tight gutters because of the way it was bound. So there was some text loss. And then this is the same Google Doc window that I showed before, but this is the issue with the multilingualism. When English popped up in the middle of Arabic text, Tesseract had a bit of a seizure about it and would come up with these wonderful things like a sort of ISBN number instead of English. And so those were very common corrections that we had to make, is whenever other languages were being inserted into the Arabic text, that was where a major correction had to happen. Okay, so assessing the modest success of this, points that I've mentioned already, using my own experience, respecting my colleagues' workloads and procedures, being patient and planning for a long-term project, identifying when and where Arabic expertise is truly needed, and bringing in a local well-funded partner, in this case, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, which is a federally funded center at UT Austin. I was able to gain their interest in it because of the benefits to the students, as well as the center in applying for the Title VI grant funding. Digital scholarship is a big area for Title VI applications, and they're coming up on another round of applications soon. I don't want to end without expressing my gratitude to all the folks who have touched this in one way or another. And that goes from my vendor to the student workers that I worked with, to content management, the center, DocWorks folks. All of them have had an incredible impact on this, and none of this would have been possible without all of them. So thank you. And thank you all so much for your attention. I look forward to hearing my colleagues' presentations and to your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Del, very much. And thank you for mentioning to Title VI, because that's my scared part. And we will move to David and Alma.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Magda, and to the organizers of the conference. It's really great to be here and to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. I'm just going to share my screen for our presentation today. And so let's see if I can get it in present mode. Is everybody seeing my slides okay? Oops, part of the slide did not reload. Okay, then I will switch to, luckily give me 1 second. I luckily did some, I made a PDF today. So let me just exit full screen. Give me 1 second.
That's what I had to do as well.
Yeah, it always happens, right? Okay, so let's see here. So downloads. Okay, I think, does everybody see that PDF on the screen? No, I haven't shared my screen yet. There we go. And I think we're ready to go. Okay, so now I have a PDF on the screen. Everyone can see that. So our talk today is called Bridging the Gap, working with transliterated proper names in cultural collections. So we're going to, if you like, today in our talk, take a step forward from where Dale left us off, right? So imagine that what you had was OCR collections. Imagine what you had was digital text that was ready to work with. Of course, one of the things that you can do is put it in as an institutional repository and allow people to use it. Another thing you could do is to connect it to the collections so that the collections that may not be searchable in one format can be used, or you can do keyword searching. What we're going to actually talk about is some computational work that one can do with collections. And in particular, we're going to be talking about finding in an automated fashion entities or proper names that exist in that collection. And we'll talk a little bit about why one might actually want to do that. So first of all, this talk today comes as a part of our OpenGulf research group, which is a transdisciplinary open knowledge-based digital humanities research group located at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I'm really happy that my co-director, who's Nora Barakat, is here in the room listening today. She's at Stanford. So we're interested in a lot of different digital projects having to do with the Gulf region, the Arabian Persian Gulf region. And so what unites us in a way is geography and the space, this common space. And of course, this is not a space of a single language, but of multiple languages, and for which you have a multilingual archival record also. So we're particularly interested in this project in People and Places, but also in other projects in People and Places that are mentioned in digital collections about this region. So we'd like to argue, or we argue on a regular basis, that for parts of the world such as the Gulf countries and for fields such as Gulf studies, digital historical research is by no means an obvious endeavor. There are many complexities in designing, launching, and sustaining digital historical research, including identifying, digitizing, and assembling data from various archives, to which I would add, after Dale's presentation, also turning those into searchable text via OCR or HTR. And added to that, computational models for working with languages, all languages actually, but especially non-English, are riddled with bias. So OpenGulf, what we're trying to do is to lay a foundation for digital work in Gulf studies that re-examine sources, some which are very well known, some which are totally ignored, for the region, privileging diverse teams of faculty, early career researchers, student research interns like Alma Kapan, who's here and who's going to co-present with me today, working together to develop new skills, to open new research horizons, to promote inclusive pedagogies, and to center new voices. So you might know some of the digital collections that exist about the Gulf. They go from the colonial to the non-colonial. Here we have on the screen just taken, you can get a copy of Lorimer's Gazetteer, right? A classic reference work about the Gulf from the Internet Archive, I believe digitized by National Library of India. Very easy to get for free. We also have, you may know, the India office records, which have been digitized by the Qatar Digital Library in the last decade or so. Those are available to us, and those are actually also available in IIIF, which makes things kind of useful for digital scholarship. Another domain that I happen to like, and I talk about a little bit in other places, are Arabic collections that circulate. And as we heard in the digital scholarship panel just before, those tend to circulate in really unorthodox and sometimes unorganized ways on social media. So we really have lots of things out there that we can use. We have to assemble them, we have to bring them together, and we have to get them ready for digital scholarship purposes. So one of the things that people want to do with such collections is transcribe them. So we heard about OCR, right? So certainly OCR is one possibility. We have open source libraries like Tesseract, but there's also lots of interesting, and particularly with the pandemic, lots of interesting initiatives like by the people at the Library of Congress or from the page that Ben and Sarah Brumsfeld have put together that allow for either library-specific or researcher-specific projects to be essentially assembled in an interface for crowd transcription. So this is actually, these are human transcription efforts, which one may think are actually more error-free than OCR. They don't necessarily end up that way because human beings, like machines, also have different opinions and different ways of transcribing things. We have also worked with a commercial service and scholarly cooperative, which I happen to be a member, called Transcribus. And what Transcribus is really great for is for the possibility of actually turning handwriting into digital text. And this is a whole other field, right? When one works with scripts is one thing, handwriting is something completely different. So why do we do this? Well, this is what follows my comma on the title of the slide, which is transcription and then. And what we happen to be interested here in is the project of annotation. So inserting, again, a form of human scholarly labor after the point where we have digital text. And we do that for multiple reasons. We do that because we want to identify where something is located. We do that sometimes maybe because we want to actually create some linked open data, like if we worked with Recogito, which is awarded the best digital humanities tool in 2018. But for this project that we're going to talk about today, we're actually interested in annotating names, proper names or entities in a text for the purposes of creating what's called training data. So what we want to do is we want to actually teach the computer to recognize those in cultural collections. And I think you can probably appreciate the reason why one would do that. Automating a process is much, much, much faster than, not necessarily error-free, but much faster than doing it with individuals. And if we can do that in a semi-supervised fashion where we have experts who know something about the particular cultures and languages in place, we can increase our chances of having a better result. So I'm going to pass over to Alma, who's going to talk to us about the idea about, and in computer science, Alma is incidentally a computer science and data science major at NYU Shanghai, and she joined the OpenGulf project as a result of an internship exchange between our campuses in the summer to work with OpenGulf. So I'm going to pass to Alma, who's going to talk a little bit about what NLP is.
Yeah, Thank you so much, Professor, for the provided opportunity. Natural language processing, NLP, is a field at intersection of computer science, linguistics, AI, and can be understood as a series of automated computational processes for working with large texts. NLP is very important for the tech sector, but often is invisible to the everyday user of computing platforms. NLP has important subfields such as information retrieval, machine translation, sentiment analysis, named entity recognition, NER, which is the focus of our project in some way, is a foundational task in each of these subfields. In the information retrieval, NLP facilitates keyword searches in search engines or catalogs by identifying correct tag of the named entity, such as person or location. Search engines are able to provide correct outputs to a search query. NER also powers sentiment analysis, where public sentiment is retrieved about particular named entities such as names of products, companies, or political figures. Sentiment analysis is used by companies to understand public reactions and comments on platforms, to predict changes in the stock market, or by social media companies to sort through posts to look for hate speech or some other irregularities. Also, we all probably know Google Translate. In Google Translate, NER is also used to pass through the text and identify proper nouns, which wouldn't be translated from one language to another. For example, if we know that a particular word is a named entity, for example, a company name, we wouldn't translate this word directly, but we would leave it as it is. So in the image to the right, we can see one example of how NER is used. So when a user enters a search, when the user enters a term, let's say Al Jazeera, Google's search engine attempts to assign a tag to the named entity Al Jazeera, depending on the spelling or neighboring words within the query. Depending on the identified tag, the search result from this particular query will show either articles related to the Qatari news outlet, for example, if Al Jazeera was tagged as an organization, or articles about geographical location in the greater New York area, if Al Jazeera was tagged as a location. So it all depends on how the classifier was trained, on what type of data was the classifier trained, and also what type of words are surrounding the target named entity. The identified tag of the named entity is based on different contextual cues. And let's go to the next slide. So this slide gives us an examples of the tagged outputs for NER with spacing from our datasets at OpenGulf specifically. So here we can see that cardinal numbers, quantities, locations have been properly recognized. However, there are still few problems. So first of all, on the first line, we can see that the word Bandar is tagged as a person, but we know that this is a part of a place name, Bandar Abbas. Further down, the same problem occurs where Bandar Abbas, the port city in Iran, is understood as a person name here. So initially, only Abbas was tagged as a person. Now Bandar Abbas are tagged together, but still the tag is incorrect. Then we can go further down and we can see that, for example, Bandar Abbas is tagged as an organization, but the correct tagging would be GPE, which is geopolitical entity, because Bandar Abbas is a port city in Iran, which we might understand from the context, but the classifier, which is trained on non-English training data, might not correctly identify this information. And this error with Bandar Abbas example is a general problem in NER that persists across languages, and it can also appear even in English language texts and corpora. For example, and this is related to the issue that we have two proper names together. For example, Dolce & Gabbana can be also tagged as an organization, fashion company, Or Dolce and Gabbana can be tagged as two separate named entities, where Dolce refers to one person's name and Gabbana refers to another person's name. So to summarize sort of this particular, or to sort of analyze this particular issue, one solution or one general approach that can potentially minimize those types of errors is to carry out some deeper analysis and potentially involve human labor to produce ground truth, and also to custom train the ML classifier that can identify target named entities correctly in most of the cases. Yeah, now I'm going to pass it back to Professor Wrisley. Thank you.
Thanks, Alma. So why is NLP important for libraries and digital scholarship? Well, NLP allows us, as you can guess from Alma's explanation, allows us to do things with cultural collections, like identify names of people and places automatically, even semi-automate the process of metadata collection. If you think about how expensive metadata is for libraries to create only with human beings, you can imagine a process that's built in of a kind of a collaborative process between a human being and a computer, human being and a machine, that might help us there. But then once we have those names, what we can do is we can actually do interesting projects like build correspondence networks. Like we have a little mini correspondence network of different people writing to each other in the India office records, materials from the Bushir residency. And then, or we could even make maps of places that are mentioned inside of a corpus. And in the bottom, we have a map of some pearling communities in the Gulf. Now, NLP is notoriously difficult, just like OCR is notoriously difficult for Oriental languages, so Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, etc. But it's also problematic in English, and we tend to oversee this. And the reason for that is that when we have transliterated names coming from non-English languages, because the NER is trained on media language and not on historical cultural collections, and particularly not on collections coming from the Middle East, it doesn't recognize those names. And this is really the issue that Alma brought up with the case of Bandar Abbas. So what are we doing in this particular collaboration inside the OpenGulf project? Well, what we're doing is we're turning to actually do some NER training using historical sources. So what we're using is an NER system called Spacey, which is usually used in the commercial sector, actually, in the business sector, that allows us to customize tags for training the computer. And what the importance of the customization is for us is that it allows us to capture the cultural specificities in cultural collections from Arabic-speaking lands and adjacent Muslim cultures that contain region-specific naming practices and region-specific entities. So let me give you an example. If we have something like Ras el-Hamar, or Hamar, I don't remember which one it is, that's the GPE that's in the center of the image on the side. We actually have to train that. That is a way that that a place name would be very commonly mentioned. And we also have to train it that it's sometimes hyphenated, sometimes it's not hyphenated. And as you can imagine, those of you who know something about Oriental scholarship has been really inconsistent in the way that it's transliterated names. So perhaps more information is actually needed than would be needed for a more stable language. But we also have, because our collections contain all kinds of other things in them, like the names of boats that were transmitting goods or transmitting mail, or the names of tribes that are found in the region, or even various different forms of money, of currencies that are being used that find themselves all over these documents. We would like to know where those are, and we'd like to be able to extract those and to work on those and to study those as historians. So the customization is a really important point, and that's where we are right now. This is a chapter from Lorimer's Gazetteer on the slide. So challenges for moving forward in this process and in this project. Computational methods, we've tried to argue today, are interconnected with questions of equity and inclusion. If methods and models from computer science don't treat well the cultural specificities of our collections, we don't find in our collections what we're looking for. So let me give you an example from real life. It's been shown that when you do background checks for immigration or visas, very often they use machine translation of things like Facebook posts that you will provide with officers. And if the machine translation is faulty, it has been shown that it will prejudice applicants' chances of getting access to a country or access to a visa. The same thing is true in digital scholarship. If we can't find people or place names, or we can't identify them correctly, we effectively don't locate them and they disappear in our collections. So how can we do better? Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is to train models on more inclusive data sets. We're also trying to build inclusive teams with varied skill sets. We're also trying to center interdisciplinary forms of knowledge, because it's really at the intersection of subject specialists and historians and computer science that this kind of work can be done. But we're also trying to learn new skills for team collaboration that allow us to bridge the many gaps in digital scholarship. So that means things like streaming crowd tagging processes using a virtual machine, something that I never would have known how to do had I not wandered into this project, developing project management skills, bringing together infrastructure for remote work, and that leads us all the way from Palo Alto to Shanghai, and of course, passing through Abu Dhabi. So I'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, David and Alma, very much for a very inspiring project. And we will move now to Ozan.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen just a moment. And yes. Yes. First of all, thanks for your attendance and inviting us for this lovely session. My name is Ozan Ceyhan. I am an Ottoman historian of late Ottoman and early Republican period of Turkey. I work in Miletos R&D company, mostly focused on artificial intelligence and mostly document intelligence. Today I'm going to talk about our Ottoman Turkish search engine and digital asset management, Müteferriqa, and how Müteferriqa will help improve our skills in digital humanities. Let's start with Ibrahim Müteferriqa and printed materials. Ibrahim Müteferriqa has a treatise presented to Grand Vizier Damat Ibrahim Pasha named Vesulet Tıba, means the benefits of printing machine. He mentions in this treatise, he mentions that indexes, Firist, which is highlighted in the left side of the page, indexes will help, which means that the table of contents at the beginning of printed books and keyword indexes at the end of the books, printed books, will help the information in numerous ways. So the readers can access information precisely and quickly. So this is where we got our inspiration from Ibrahim Müteferriqa and named our platform Müteferriqa. So let's jump to our website. First, let's have a look at our collection. Müteferriqa periodicals, now I'm presenting you. We have numerous amount of issues from different journals. And basically, it has a function of full text search. So let's start with a word like Canada in Ottoman periodicals. So here are the results with has a match with the full text named Canada. And when you filter, you can filter on the left side of the page. You can filter your results. So let's do one of it. And you can sort, you can put in order in terms of the date. So let's see, in Jalidi Havadis, the 1841, the one of the first periodicals in Ottoman Empire. Here you can see that most probably the earliest mention of state Canada in Ottoman periodicals, the Ottoman printed materials maybe. You can see that Amerika'da İngiltere Devlet Hükümeti'nde Kanada, in American continent, which mentions also the Canada. So you can see that the Canada word is highlighted. On the right side of our tool, you have a search inside the item box. You can have a look with a book view. And you can turn your page, zoom in and zoom out. And we also have a dynamic page view mode, which helps the readers a lot because, you know, the large scale pages is sometimes hard to read and sometimes hard to focus, sometimes hard to find the words which is highlighted. We also have zoom in and zoom out and turn, rotate the page, and it helps you to find the highlighted word easily. So let's go back to the features of our system. On the right down side of the keyboard, you can see 3 buttons. The asterisk one helps you to find the words with the suffixes. So let's do an example. And I am looking for the word America, and add the asterisk. And the results of our query will show the words America basically, and Amerika'da with a suffix. You can find the words. And on the left side, you can find the metadata option. You can have a look at the all pages at the same time. We also have content-based recommendation, which helps you to find the similar items of Jalidi Havadis in terms of the content of the issue. And we also have the bookmark option. You can bookmark this issue, and on your personal profile page, you can reach your you can reach your bookmarks. Here are my bookmarks, you know, Resimli Cuma, Akbaba, and etc. You can also remove it from here, and you can also go back to your journal issue from this bookmarks page. Let's have a look at the advanced search mode. Here, I'm going to show you another feature of Müteferriqa, the quotation mark, the combination of words. So let's have a look at railways, demiryolu. Demiryolu is a combination of 2 words. You can see that 2 words in quotation mark. And let's say I'm looking for a journal with the title Sabah, morning in Turkish. And let's say the date is, I'm looking for the word railroad, demiryolu in Sabah journal in 1876. Here are the results of Sabah. The title is Sabah, the date is, year is 1876. And when you click one of them, you are going to reach your query results like demiryolu, Rumeli demiryolu here. One more thing about Müteferriqa is also the fuzzy search mode. The fuzzy search helps you to find similar words, like for example, foreign names, foreign words. You can sometimes transcribe in different ways, in different transcriptions. In fuzzy search mode, you can easily find different versions of the words, like for example, Bellini or Darwin or some another foreign names, foreign words. And you can also search with Latin alphabet. Let's have a search for the word doctor in French. Here you can see the word doctor, and let's jump to another pin. Here, doctor it is. And all the functions can be found in this help question mark button, like with the functions, asterisk, tilde, and quotation mark, and the other features of Müteferriqa. So basically, this is how Müteferriqa works. This is what Müteferriqa does. So let's jump to the presentation. So if you'd like to go over the features of Müteferriqa, this is it allows you to search in Ottoman, Turkish, and Latin script, like single words and multiple word phrases, as we have seen. And so you can do a search in metadata and combine queries with advanced search. You can filter your results, and you can do search with wildcard and fuzzy search tools. And we also have content-based recommendation, which can allows scholars to have a broad view about their focused content. A user interface is one of our important features, because it's easy to use, straightforward navigation, search phrase highlighting, and dynamic page view. Dynamic page view is very important, as I mentioned in my Müteferriqa presentation, and accurate results in short order. And full text and metadata compilation will help you help you your search. Virtual Ottoman Turkish keyboards. You can also use your Arabic keyboard, by the way, if you have it in your computer. And personalization, as I have mentioned in bookmarks section, you can personalize your collection. Our sources are in this periodicals website is Hakkı Tarıkus collection. Hakkı Tarıkus, maybe some of you know him, but Hakkı Tarıkus is a collector, a writer, and politician, one of the most important intellectuals in Ottoman and early Republican period of Turkey, which has a valuable collections on periodicals. And also we are going to have another database on books, which also Seyfettin Özege, who is the collector and the bibliographer in Turkish Republic. We are going to present two different databases. One of them focuses on periodicals, one of them focuses on books. Maybe some of you are aware about Hakkı Tarık's digital collection in Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. On the left side, you can see the current version of the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies Hakkı Tarık's collection website. We, in Müteferriqa, we divided the pages into two and remove the dark and unreadable situation of the pages. And here is another example what we have done to the images, and we are going to use the master and original copies of this this collection. As a digital humanities tool, Müteferriqa will help scholars to investigate printed materials from the Ottoman Empire comparatively in multitude of source languages and with high accuracy. This is our this is the most important slide of my presentation. This is our aims, where we aim to go. On the left side, you can see we divide the Ottoman documents in terms of type, script, language, and also we aim to evolve our tool as some research tools. And we are going to include books, manuscripts, archival documents, and maps. We are going to include all of the other scripts, mainly Rika. We would like to add the other languages, Arabic, Armenian, Greek, and French, which are the most common languages in Ottoman Empire and its neighbors. And we are going to serve like the capture images among the text, discover the tables, capture the dates, recognize named entities, and we also aim to do like an image search maybe. These are our aims on Müteferriqa. We kindly to register at periodicals.müteferriqa.com. You can have an account on this website, and we also have. I would like to also special thanks to Kaya Kohayashi from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, which helped us. She helped us very much on this project, and we also the TÜBİTAK Turkish Science and Technology Research Grant on some part of this project is funded by TÜBİTAK. We also have another Müteferriqa example in Istanbul Chamber of Commerce archive on periodicals and bulletins. And then you can also visit archive, which is archive in Turkish.ito.org.tr. And we also kindly invite you to register and enjoy this Müteferriqa experience in Istanbul Chamber of Commerce archive. And I really thank all of you for your patience and attendance. You can contact us via email. This is my personal email and also Müteferriqa info email, and these are our websites. And please follow us on social media, the four of them, the Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram is Müteferriqa. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for wonderful presentation. Everyone presented a very unique aspect of digital humanities. And I really personally appreciate all the knowledge that you shared with us. I have a question, and I hope my colleagues on the chat can just post your question or just raise your hand and ask your question directly to our panelists. But my first question to all of you, everyone is doing something different and something unique. How can we collaborate to create like something that will be able to share it, all of us together? How can we do that? I know, you know, Del, you addressed the students working and funding, and we're not all able to do this kind of grant and getting people to support that. But I think we all have in-house talent. So how can we collaborate in a project that we all have similar thing? I know we all have periodicals, we all have books, we buy the same thing. So that's just very general questions. Any of you can start to just, you know, tackle that aspect. I know sharing is not very easy, but we used to, actually we are sharing a lot of things. You know, the bibliographic record, we just put one record in OCLC and we share it. And I think this is just my own perspective, we cannot do it all alone. I mean, it's very hard. It's very hard financially and support. And why do I have to duplicate someone work and I can get access to your work? So that's just very general questions. And I hope I have an answer.
Sure. I don't know if I have a good answer, but I will say I think this is something that also came up at the roundtable, that many of those speakers identified is that they'd like more connections, more ability to communicate and share what they've learned, what they're working on. And I know there have been various attempts at, you know, hubs for these kinds of projects and this kind of communication. The closest thing I could think for our work is like the Islamic Digital Humanities Network. But I mean, none of these are ever comprehensive, right? I mean, even OCLC, as great as it is, it's not everything in the world, right? Even though the website is worldcat.org, it's not really everything, right? But they want to, they're trying to get there. That's the aspiration, right? And so for my small part, I think just trying to make my project materials available for others to be able to reuse is definitely one step in that direction. But I don't know if any one institution has the capacity to really start being a hub for any of this. I suspect that eventually digital scholarship should hopefully become so normal and digital methods so integrated into what we're doing that people will know more about what others are engaging in. I personally think part of the issue, at least for OCR, but I think this goes for some of the other projects, other areas of work in digital scholarship and Middle East studies, is that it's not well shared. I think David's group is actually a really good example, the Camel Lab, because you all actually share what you're doing. You have descriptions of your projects, you have materials up there. But then I look at other projects, and I'm not going to name any names right now, but like you look at other ones and they keep getting funding and they get more funding and their interviews and their advisory boards and all these things, but nothing that anyone else can interact with and benefit from. Or if there is something, you have to have such a high level of technical expertise that has not been brought to like the average researcher level yet. Like it's raw, very raw. And so, you know, people have to train themselves up before they can even try to look at it. But that's what I have to say.
David, can you share how do you work with a group? How did you get that group together to fulfill the need of the region?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. It's a great question. The thing that I want to say, first of all, is that by asking this question, what you do is you evoke a kind of a collaborative spirit that exists inside of digital humanities, right? Or digital scholarship. That's not necessarily true of all labs, because there are some places that have very, very specific, very, very important and specific targeted skills that are required to kind of carry out the work. One of the reasons that our project is called OpenGulf is not just because openness is a hot word that people use, but openness is, we try to model openness in lots of the things that we do. So for example, if you go to our OpenGulf website, it's actually generated from a GitHub repository where the product of all of our data sits, right? So the kind of the site that you view is actually just sitting right next to key data that we've actually produced. And of course, the data that I produce is not necessarily the data that someone else wants to produce, right? That is the nature of scholarship, right? Is that people have different research questions and they go for different things. But I think for us, openness also means not just providing data for other people to reuse, but providing examples, like sort of it's a modeling process, right? Whereby which you see something that someone did today, you hear what Dale, the way that Dale thought about dealing with, for example, the lack of Arabic resources and the way that the project was reorganized so that it kept functioning. There was an eye for sustainability. Or you think about, you see and you never thought, right, that for Ottoman Turkish that it would be keyword searchable, right? Or that you could, like those things, you come to an event like this, and then what you hope for is that the examples that are provided are not necessarily easy, because everything takes some training in the world, but they're available for people, right? And I think that, so one of the things that I in particular so I've been living in the Middle East for 20 years and working in the Middle East for 20 years. And one of the things that has been really interesting is when you work in what is a Research One university or a very a well-funded private university, people right next to you don't have the same resources at all, even though you share exactly the same block that you live on, right? Or you are colleagues at university, across universities. So I think modeling practices based on open materials, based on things that can be done, it's not easy, but what it does is it provides a real, like a kind of a fair or a fairer playing field for people to collaborate together. So that's what I would add to that question. Thanks for it.
Wonderful. Any other comment from you, Ozan?
We are a group of academicians working in a company. So as a company, we are also looking for benefits. Yes. We are academicians. At one side, we are academicians. We know how to collaborate. We know how to create knowledge. And at the same time, we are a company. We are looking for benefits, so we can create new things. We can develop some other tools for mostly digital humanities or some other areas. So I can say we are at the edge of collaborating and also being an example. So I can say that we are at the side of being example that how scientific knowledge, how academic works can create useful tools and technologies. So I can say that being an example is some other example of collaboration and give inspiration for some other people.
Well, thank you very much. Please, if you would like to ask a question to our panelists, either raise your hand or put it in the chat. We don't want to miss the opportunity. We have here very talented people that can answer your question. But I will ask one more question. Now, is there any usability studies on what you're doing, all of you? Like, did you test? I know you're doing it for a purpose, but did you test it, how it looks like, how they're using it? How I looked at Müteferriqa, by the way, before the presentation. I was very interested in it, just see how it works. But I'm very much interested in usability study to see how we are making impact on scholars and researchers.
I'll jump in with that one. One of the things that's just really interesting about usability. I mean, when I heard you ask that question, what I thought you meant was the usability of tools as opposed to the usability, like the usability meaning impact. Because I think those are kind of two separate, they're connected in a way, because if you have things that are not usable, people won't use them, right? But it's a very interesting question about impact, because I don't, in the past, I have tracked visitors to my websites and looked at web traffic and done all those kinds of things. I kind of feel like that because we've been working on this, so it's so recent, and by that I mean since 2018, and then the pandemic hit, that kind of my brain space was not really available for that kind of stuff. But what I can say about impact is that one of the impacts that we can demonstrate, and I would say is not necessarily from the data that we've produced yet, we might see that coming sooner or later, but we can definitely demonstrate an impact in skills development and on capacity building, because people around this project, like Alma, like other students, and we have a long list of students on our website of people who worked for us, had internships, done all kinds of things, have gone on and have created all kinds of interesting things and are carrying those skills into their higher education and into the kinds of research projects that they're carrying out. So from that perspective, the usability of the data itself we may not be able to say that yet, but certainly from skill perspective, it's been very powerful.
I think I would have to agree with that last part of what, all of it, but especially that last part of what David just said about skill building. I don't think it's necessarily this project that we're doing with Arabic OCR, but that context that I was talking about my own interest in non-Roman script OCR and teaching it, that I think I have been vocal enough about how folks can do their own OCR and make their research materials even more useful to them than they are now. That I think that's assisted with some skill building, even if it did have to happen on one's own through experimentation and all these different things, and not necessarily through a course or anything like that. Yeah, otherwise I haven't done any formal studies necessarily.
I can add that we, as I said before, we are a company, but we are also academicians and we are scientists, natural scientists, and I'm a historian but based in biology. We developed our own OCR tool, by the way. We didn't implement some other OCR APKs in the market you can find easily, and there wasn't any Ottoman Turkish OCR before we began. We developed our own OCR tool. We developed our own all these image processing system and all the digital tools to present the documents correctly and comprehensively. So this is what we do for usability. The usability is our life in digital humanities areas. We also do some other stuff rather than historical documents. We work on financial documents. We also have other products which are used in banks and some financial companies, mainly focus on the document intelligence. So usability is everything for us.
Wonderful. I have lots of questions. I was hearing you, and it's just amazing. I wish Alma is with us, answering this or taking these questions. When she talked about Google Translate, I really did not catch that. If she can just elaborate a little bit about how does she use Google Translate in that aspect? How Google, because I use Google Translate and every word is just you have to look at it very carefully. So right? David, you
Can
smile.
can I add on to that? I would love to hear
Yes.
more from Alma about that. But also Nora Barakat has her hand up too. I think she might have a question after that. So.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the Google Translate is probably one of the ways how named entity recognition can be used or is used currently. In Google Translate, usually in order for the machine to correctly translate majority of the text, it's usually preferable to identify named entities first, so that the machine knows which words need to be translated literally from one language to another, and which words can be left as they are. So, for example, let's say like the word OpenGulf, if it's a proper name and if it's a name of the lab, then if we translate it, let's say from English to Arabic, then we might potentially leave the word as it is. But if it's if OpenGulf is not a name, is not recognized as a named entity, then the machine will translate OpenGulf literally to Arabic, like open and Gulf separately. So this might be one of the main use cases for named entity recognition. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much for this answer. And we have a question from Nora Barakat. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I just want to start by thanking David and Alma for presenting OpenGulf so beautifully and giving me a really much deeper understanding of a process that I was kind of peripheral to but involved in over the summer. And that was really helpful to hear. My question is actually more for Dale, and it's about how we sort of recruit and involve. And it speaks also to what David was saying about sort of the long-term pedagogical promise of these kinds of collaborative projects, right? With students at different levels of their academic journey. But how we recruit and involve and maintain investment in projects like these, especially students who don't have language abilities, right? And maybe even colleagues who don't have language abilities. Because I was really inspired and excited when you started talking about having people involved, first of all, your colleagues who are not necessarily working on the same geographical region, but also students doing the zoning who don't know Arabic, right? I mean, I think this is also part of my own struggle because I just moved from where it was not problematic to find students who had Arabic proficiency to work on a project, to Stanford, where it actually is sort of surprisingly to me a little more difficult to recruit because the language knowledge is not only about, you know, knowing what part of this, you know, whether you're looking at a title or content, different kind of content, it's also about investment in this kind of work, right? In making OCR a more, you know, globally accessible tool. And so I guess that's kind of, I'd love to hear more about how you built those teams and how you sort of got the word out, and then how you like got people to stick with you. Maybe it just has to do with, you know, a semester of student internship, but yeah.
So those are all great questions. So with the students, I think a lot of the success came out of the fact that we have an existing position in the libraries for a graduate research assistant, and that's called the Global Studies Digital Projects, GRA. And that's funded by 4 different Title VI centers. It's funded by the Middle East Studies Center, by South Asia Institute, and then the Center for European Studies and the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. And so that's written into their Title VI grants. We've had it for at least 3 cycles now, actually, with the grant. And so obviously we're going into another Title VI cycle soon. We will be including that again. We're helping them to include that in their grant applications. And I supervise that position, which is kind of a historical artifact of my career at UT, but the fact is that right now I still supervise that position. And So I meet a cohort of students every year that I recruit for that position who are incredible. They all have various language skills and are interested in digital projects in different ways. Many are from our School of Information, which is also another local bonus at UT. We have one of the top iSchools in the country. And many students who are still interested in libraries and archives and not just UX, which is great. Who are looking for projects to do. And so I had that GRA basically at my disposal during the time of the development of this project. So she actually helped write up part of the digitization proposal for it. And then I had this capstone student, and she was someone that I had known since we had recruited her to be a student at UT. She won the Atiyah Prize a few years ago with MELA. She's now a librarian in Boston. That's Lucy Flam. She's fantastic. And so Lucy and I had kind of been growing our relationship anyway, and doing a capstone with her was kind of a natural outcome of all that. And so that project was able to take on some of the things that she wanted to go more deeply into as part of an internship that she hadn't really been able to address quite as much in classes, and have like a final product to show. So that was really mutually beneficial. And I like those kinds of arrangements where the student, I mean, I would love for them to get paid too, but that they get something professionally out of this that they can point to in the future and say, look at the thing that I did. This was a great contribution, and explain that for another job interview. And so I continued with the GRA over that following year. And that GRA, again, she didn't know Arabic, but she had worked for the Library of Congress and had basically no fear of other languages. I know that might sound weird to all of us here because we all deal with multiple languages all the time. Many of us are second, third, fourth, et cetera, language speakers, right? But in the US context, and I'm sure you've seen this too, not many Americans know a second language very well. Increasingly, we're getting there for various reasons. But I think it's more the exception to find somebody who is not bothered by the fact that, okay, now I have to look at Yoruba. That's what she had been faced with at the Library of Congress. And she was not fazed by that. Another project that she had at the GRA was one that dealt with Hindi and Urdu. Was not fazed by dealing with those scripts either. And it's not like she knew any of these languages. She was not, someone who's particularly adept at languages to take these on immediately and, read to a dictionary and then you know it, right? It's nothing like that. She was just comfortable not knowing and doing what she did know to help the project. And I think that's what I tried to cultivate with another GRA who had done some of the zoning work, and then my current GRA, is you don't have to know everything. There are certain tasks that we are asking you to do, and that we can teach you or that you've developed elsewhere. And those are going to be a great contribution to the project. We can merge your knowledge and your expertise with somebody else's, and fit all of these pieces together. Because, for example, I'm not an expert in DocWorks. So I have a colleague at the library who knows all the ins and outs of metadata and DocWorks and all this stuff. And I leave that in her very capable hands. Yet another colleague who's an expert at digitizing paper resources. I trust his judgment on, for example, the gutter situation with the bindings. And so we're all trying to fit our pieces of knowledge together. And I think that's a really important skill to develop in students. And it comes more easily for some than others. But it's something that's going to be beneficial for them overall. And I think it's beneficial for these kinds of projects when you're trying to recruit. So yeah, being comfortable not knowing everything. Yeah, it is. Yeah. I don't know how many times in this session I've said, I don't know this, I'm not an expert in that, but here's my contribution. Here's what I can say. Yep, that's my philosophy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my entire life in DH. I know nothing, but thank you for that.
Okay.
And we can take one more question because we are over the time. So if we can have just one more questions. ask this question then. I have the opportunity. I cannot live without it. How do you decide? How do you decide which collection you start with? I mean, how do you say, okay, and another thing that I wish we have enough time, collaboration with other departments in your library. That's itself a challenge. I know you Del work with somebody else to digitize these and all of you. So, but yeah, if you can just shed the light and how do you decide on the collection and how you initiate the discussion with other.
So
One of
I'll
you go
jump.
ahead.
Go ahead, Dale. Go.
No, one of you go ahead. I just spoke.
What I was going to say is, in a way, when we're talking about Middle East collections, you start with the one that's digitized. I mean, it's like, I mean, if you're going to do what we're trying to do, you start with what you have. And right, and so part of the, I think this is exactly the reason that Ozan's company chose the Haga Taragus collection, because that's what's available for Ottoman periodicals, right? So we all, we're all in a situation where we have lots of things that we'd like to do, but what is available to us for the languages and the cultures that we're working on is relatively small compared to the rest of the world. And so it's, in a way, there's a kind of a, some people talk about computing and digital scholarship in general as kind of like designing under constraint, right? It's like we have a lot of constraints. We can't do everything that we want to do. And I think that's one of the tougher things for people who are new to digital scholarship, is that they kind of imagine a world of all kinds of things that their intellect and that their creativity can imagine. But in reality, it's just not going to happen, right? With the resources and the materials that are available. So I would just say you start with what you have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I totally agree with this. Is Seyfettin Özege books collection is the most valuable collections of books, which contains, as the best guess, is the 90% of printed books in Ottoman Turkish. So Seyfettin Özege is that. But Hakkı Tarıkus part is important for us because Hakkı Tarıkus digital collection, the digitalization project was around 2007, 2009. It stopped, and they started to present this digital collection in website in 2012, but with an outdated technology, they have the images were the deja vu file. Deja vu file is a kind of compression, and it as you have seen in my presentation, images were dark and impossible to read, and etc. So we aim to do Hakkı Tarıkus collection to recover, to make an archaeology about on this digital collection. So this is why we have chosen those collections. And about the collaborations, we also made collaborations with the historians in Turkey and also abroad to choose what collection, because Hakkı Tarıkus was on the website, but it was unreachable and unusable and unreadable. So the collaborations about our technology and about historical documents helped us to find which collection to reach and use in our tools.
Well,
so what I would add.
Frozen.
Oh, sorry.
I am frozen. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, but your video is frozen. I apologize. Yes.
Okay, that's okay. Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, no, I was just going to add, in my case, I think I had a little bit more privilege to choose what I was working with because I also can acquire materials. And there's a whole ethics of acquiring as well, but I did choose to acquire the CEASE journal amongst others because of an identified need in terms of research interest. And then I also knew that it was also a need for Arabic OCR, that Arabic periodicals was an area that was particularly difficult to work in with OCR. And I wanted to see what we could do with what we already had. So in my case, what we already had was the DocWorks. So I was choosing to use that and work with our local tools, what we already had available, and then apply my new content that I was able to acquire. So that's how I was thinking about that.
Well, I would like to thank all of you. We are 8 minutes over the time, which is okay. And I think we learned tons of information from each of you. And I wish we can continue this discussion and in the future. And we can use you as a resource people. Now we have 3 of you are really advancing in this area. I know that, but we will call on you to ask questions. Seriously. So I will. But
Please do.
I
Please do.
appreciate everything you said, all of the knowledge that you shared with us. Thank you, Alma. She's not with us in the screen, but I appreciate her talent, technological aspects of it, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the MELA conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Magda.
Thank you. Thank you so much
David and Alma.
for your patience. Yeah.
See you all.
Oh, that's okay. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.